When I was an Uber driver, I had a scary experience that I'll never forget. Let me tell you the whole story. It was a freezing cold Friday night in December, one of the coldest nights of the year. I was just 18 years old, driving around in my brand new Honda Accord. My parents spoiled me a bit, but they always told me to be careful, especially when picking up strangers. So I kept a small blade in my car for safety, just in case I encountered any weirdos. That night, I had nothing else to do, so I decided to do some late-night pickups. I received a request from a guy named Jack, who was a few miles away in a busy shopping area. As I drove towards the location, I noticed a group of teenagers hanging around near the shopping center. They seemed like trouble, and I hoped Jack wasn't part of that group. They stared at me in my car as I slowly passed by, making me feel uneasy. I didn't want any trouble, so I quickly drove further into the parking lot, trying to get away from them. I circled the whole parking lot twice, hoping they would lose interest in me. Finally, I saw someone approaching my car from behind through my left mirror. I rolled down my window and called out, "Jack?" He responded, "Yes." I asked him to hop in, but for some reason he didn't seem to understand me. I had to repeat myself 3 times, and even then he got confused. Eventually he walked slowly around the back of my car and got into the seat right behind me. Most people would sit diagonally from me, which I preferred, but Jack chose to sit right behind me. It made me a little paranoid, especially since he seemed creepy and much older, maybe in his 40s. I could tell from his voice that he was a heavy smoker, and my car started to smell like cigarettes. I asked him where he wanted to go, and he gave me an address. I entered it into my phone, and it showed that it was about 10 miles away. That was fine with me because longer rides meant more money. I tried to make small talk at first, but Jack wasn't very responsive. He mumbled or gave short, dry answers to my questions. It made me uncomfortable, so I stopped talking altogether when he completely ignored one of my questions. As we drove, I couldn't shake off the feeling that he was staring at me. I was afraid to look into the rearview mirror, but curiosity got the better of me, and I took a quick glance. My suspicions were confirmed. He was indeed staring at me. It sent shivers down my spine, and I started to panic a little. I pressed harder on the gas pedal, hoping the ride would be over soon. By the time we reached the 6-mile mark, things started to get even more unsettling. We were in the middle of nowhere, driving down a deserted street with woods on either side and only a few occasional buildings. I began to doubt if the address he gave me was real. So while still driving, I slid the map on my phone in the direction of the address. To my surprise, it led to a dead-end street with no other streets nearby. My nervousness grew with each passing minute. I stole another glance at the mirror, and there he was, still watching me. I mustered up the courage to ask him if the address was really his house. There was a moment of silence, and I thought he would ignore me again. Or maybe he hadn't heard me. But after 5 seconds, he finally answered, "Yes." There was less than a mile left to drive, and we were surrounded by nothing but dark woods and occasional empty-looking buildings. As we approached the dead-end street, I slowed down, pretending to look for the address. But I couldn't see any houses. It was just pitch blackness. I couldn't help but wonder why he wanted to bring me here, far away from anyone or anything. Trying to buy some time, I continued driving as if I missed the street, hoping he wouldn't notice. But he did. He hopped out of his seat and yelled at me to turn around. Honestly, at that moment, I felt like my life was in danger. I had a blade in my car, and without thinking, I quickly opened it and held it tightly in my right hand, ready to defend myself if necessary. I turned the car down the dead-end road, and my headlights revealed exactly what I feared. Nothing but trees on both sides. We reached the end of the road, and there wasn't a single house or building in sight. I just knew something was about to go wrong. I mentally prepared myself for the worst. Then, in the softest voice he could muster, he said, "Thanks for the ride." I wasn't even thinking about money at that point. He opened his door, but before stepping out, he asked me to get out of the car for a second to help him carry his bag. He claimed to have a bad back, but the strange thing was, he didn't have a bag. He didn't come in with one, and it seemed fishy. I replied, trying to sound calm, "Yeah, sure. Let yourself out and I'll help you in a sec." My voice was shaky, and my fear was apparent. Then something I never imagined happened. Suddenly, I felt pressure on my neck. It took me a moment to realize that Jack was choking me from the back seat. My instinct kicked in, and I didn't think twice. I forcefully drove the blade into his left arm, and he screamed in pain, releasing his grip on my neck. He fell out of the car and onto the street. I took that opportunity to turn the car around as fast as I could and sped away from that terrifying place until I reached a busy road. I was terrified and shaking, but I didn't call the police. I was too scared to do anything except drive straight home. By the time I got home, all I wanted to do was forget about the whole incident and go to sleep. Needless to say, I resigned from my Uber driving days after that horrifying experience. When I was working as a trucker, there was an unforgettable night that I still shiver to think about. It happened 3 years ago in the heart of Kansas, where I was transporting shipments for a warehouse company. The chilling events unfolded on a cold Monday, as the week was just beginning, and a ton of loads needed to be shipped. At 3 p.m., I embarked on my journey behind the wheel of my trusty semi-truck. Determined to reach my destination that same night, I pushed myself to complete the deliveries quickly. Driving slightly above the speed limit, I was racing against time. However, as the clock struck midnight, exhaustion started to creep upon me. My eyes grew dry, and the effort to keep them wide open became a daunting task. To combat the drowsiness, I splashed some water on my hand and rubbed it on my face, hoping it would awaken my senses. With the road deserted and my headlights piercing through the darkness, the only companion was the sound of my truck's engine. Then, something peculiar caught my attention. In the distance, I spotted a figure rapidly approaching. I slammed on the brakes, bringing my mighty truck to a halt. As the vehicle came to a standstill, I could make out the features of this mysterious person standing in the middle of the road. Clad in all black with a peculiar black scarf wrapped around his neck. What struck me the most was his abnormally long neck. Though I couldn't discern any details of his face, it sent shivers down my spine. Curiosity sparked within me, and I contemplated rolling down the window to offer him a ride. However, before I could utter a word, he abruptly turned to his left and darted into the dense woods. Astonished, I didn't waste a second and hit the gas pedal, determined to put the strange encounter behind me and forge ahead. But little did I know that this would be just the beginning of my nightmarish journey. A few minutes later, while cruising at my normal speed, a dark figure sprinted across the road in front of me. At first, I believed it to be a large animal, but as it vanished into the depths of the woods, I realized it was another person. Fear gripped me, and I accelerated, eager to escape the mounting unease that clouded my mind. However, weariness took its toll, and my driving became increasingly erratic. I found myself drifting into the other lane, swerving dangerously. With approximately 40 minutes remaining in the drive, doubts flooded my thoughts. Uncertain if I could endure any longer, I scanned the surroundings for a safe place to pull over and rest. Thankfully, a small gravel clearing on the side of the road presented itself as a temporary refuge. I maneuvered the semi-truck into the clearing, parked it, and reclined my seat, intending to rest my eyes for just a short while. The weariness enveloped me, and I succumbed to sleep. However, my slumber was abruptly interrupted by an inexplicable feeling of dread. My instincts urged me to turn on the headlights, and without hesitation, I flicked the knob, illuminating the darkness outside. To my horror, standing in front of the truck was the same man with the black scarf I had seen earlier. His face, now much clearer, bore a chillingly wide smile, and his eyes were stretched wide open, staring right at me through the windshield. Fear surged through my veins as I swiftly ignited the engine, pulling out of the clearing as best as I could. Panic consumed me as I tried to comprehend how he had traversed 10 miles from where I had last encountered him. Determined not to give in to my terror, I refused to stop again that night until I reached my intended destination. Eventually, I found solace in the parking lot, where I managed to grab a few hours of restless sleep. To this day, I struggle to make sense of that haunting night. Was it all a figment of my imagination? My mind playing cruel tricks on me? When I was a kid, I had the most unforgettable experience with my friends. We were a tight-knit group who loved playing baseball together. There were 6 of us who played in a league, and we would also have fun playing pickup baseball in a secret spot. Let me tell you all about it. You see, we lived in the countryside, where there was a hidden gem, a small clearing in the woods. It had everything we needed: a baseball field, and even a basketball court. It was like our own little private park, and the best part was that nobody else knew about it. This hidden place was tucked away on a dead-end dirt road, surrounded by beautiful forests. That's why we had it all to ourselves. We were all about 11 or 12 years old back then, and living in the country meant our parents were a bit more relaxed about letting us go out and play on our own. So, every day, I would grab my trusty baseball bag with my bat, glove, and some extra balls and walk to that special field. It was about a quarter-mile away from my house, and I always looked forward to those walks. Now, let me take you to that fateful day, the day that changed everything for our group. It was a warm Friday evening in the middle of July, and the sun was slowly setting, painting the sky a deep orange. We knew our game had to wrap up soon. I happened to be up at bat when two of my friends, who were playing in the outfield, pointed towards something. We all turned to look, and what we saw sent chills down our spines. A big group of men, about 6 of them, appeared at the edge of the clearing. They were in their 20s or 30s, and I have to admit, they didn't look like the kind of guys you'd want to meet in a dark alley. They didn't seem like they belonged to a gang, but there was something off about them. They sat down on a nearby bench and just started watching us play. We could hear their loud laughter and see their intense stares. It made us all feel uneasy. We exchanged nervous glances, and without saying a word, we knew it was time to pack up. It was getting late, and the presence of those men made us feel uncomfortable. As we started gathering our gear and putting it in our bags, they called out, "Oh, don't leave." But we didn't listen. We said our goodbyes, high-fived each other, and turned to look back at the bench. Our hearts sank when we saw that all 6 men were now standing, still fixated on us. Usually, I walked home alone because my house was in a different direction from the others. But on that day, I felt a bit scared. I asked my friend Jordan to come with me, just to make it less obvious that I was walking alone. We walked together until we reached the dirt path that led me home. After giving Jordan a high five, we went our separate ways. As I continued my journey home, the woods grew darker and darker. It felt as if the trees were closing in on me. I was on high alert, every little sound making me jump. I had a flashlight with me, which I always carried in my baseball bag, and I kept shining it around to ease my growing paranoia. My heart raced in my chest, and I just wanted to get home safely and jump into my cozy bed. Every step I took in the dirt seemed to amplify the sounds around me. I could hear laughter and shouting in the distance, but it wasn't the laughter of my friends. It was the laughter of those grown men. It sent shivers down my spine, and I picked up my pace, unintentionally dropping a few spare baseballs from my unzipped bag. Frustrated, I sighed and crouched down to pick them up with my flashlight's beam. Suddenly, the snapping of leaves and twigs behind me made my heart stop. I quickly turned, shining the light in that direction, and there, revealed in the light, was a tall man wearing a black hooded sweatshirt with the hood covering his face. He was slowly inching his way closer to me, and fear surged through every inch of my body. But as soon as the light fell upon him, he stopped inching and started running toward me at full speed. I felt a surge of adrenaline like never before as I sprinted for my life. I dropped my flashlight and left behind all my precious baseball gear. My only focus was on reaching the safety of my home. I could hear my pursuer behind me, their heavy footsteps echoing in the darkness. Panic filled my every breath until, finally, I saw the light from my house. With the last of my energy, I screamed for my mom and dad, and that's when I heard the person chasing me turn around. My parents were in a state of shock as I poured out the terrifying ordeal I had just experienced. They immediately called the parents of my 7 friends, making sure they were all safe and explaining what had happened. Thankfully, all of my friends made it home okay that night. However, I later learned that my friend Jordan was also followed briefly before managing to escape. We were all shaken by what had occurred. Our parents decided it was too dangerous for us to go to that field anymore. From that day forward, our treasured spot became off limits. Now, many years have passed, but the memory still lingers in my mind. We all still live in the same houses, and it can be unsettling to know that those men, those strangers, once knew where I lived. I went on an exciting adventure with my trusty Jeep. My name is Alex, and I love exploring the great outdoors all by myself. So, I decided to take my Jeep on a road trip to Colorado for some off-roading fun in the wilderness. My destination was the beautiful Red Feather Lakes, where there were plenty of thrilling trails to conquer. As the day went on, I tackled one trail after another, feeling the adrenaline rush through my veins. The challenging Dead Man's Road Trail was my final stop for the day, and although it was tough, the breathtaking scenery made it all worthwhile. As night fell, I parked my Jeep just off the trail, hoping to find a secluded spot away from other drivers. I folded down the back seats and prepared my sleeping bag for a cozy night's sleep. You see, instead of traditional camping in a tent, I prefer the luxury of sleeping in the back of my Jeep amidst the woods. After enjoying a simple dinner of protein bars and snacks, I settled into my sleeping bag. Although it wasn't the most comfortable setup, I was willing to endure a bit of discomfort for the chance to witness the sunrise in this serene setting. I closed all the windows tightly to keep bugs out, but still listened intently to the sounds outside. Suddenly, something unexpected happened. I heard a voice echoing from the depths of the woods, followed by a short burst of laughter. My heart raced, and fear crept over me. Who could be out there in the pitch-black darkness? It seemed impossible for anyone to be walking around in that desolate place. I peered out the windows, hoping to catch a glimpse of headlights or taillights. But there was nothing, just darkness and the mysterious voice that grew clearer with each passing moment. I couldn't tell if it belonged to a man or a woman, but one thing was certain. Someone was out there, and I didn't know what they wanted. With each passing second, my fear intensified. I desperately wanted to retreat to the safety of the driver's seat and drive away, but I was frozen with terror. I convinced myself that if I stayed still and hidden, whoever it was might not see me. It didn't make much sense, but it was my only sliver of hope amidst the growing dread. Then out of nowhere, there was a loud bang on my rear windshield. I jolted upright, fear coursing through my veins, and instinctively leapt over the two front seats into the driver's seat. Without a second thought, I started the engine and sped away as fast as I could manage on the rocky terrain. The darkness seemed to chase me, and my heart pounded in my chest. I was afraid that whoever had caused that terrifying noise might be running after me. Unfortunately, the rough terrain limited my speed, but I drove with all the determination I could muster. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of the red glow from my taillights but saw no sign of the mysterious figure. It felt like a nightmare, but I pushed through, exhaustion be damned. I continued driving along the trail until I finally reached the safety of the paved road. Mile after mile, I drove until I spotted a motel in the distance. Relief washed over me as I pulled into the parking lot, grateful to have escaped that terrifying encounter. Some people have questioned whether it could have been someone stranded and in need of help, but I firmly believe that nobody would be wandering around in the deep darkness, laughing without a flashlight. And surely they wouldn't bang on my windshield just to frighten me if they genuinely needed assistance. When I was 22 years old, I got a job in a big city called New York. I lived in a place called Jersey, but the problem was that the commute from there to the city was really difficult. So, I knew I had to move to the city. But there was a challenge. I didn't have much money yet. One day I saw an ad on a website called Craigslist. It said there was a bedroom available in an apartment in a place called Hell's Kitchen, and the rent was really cheap. I got excited and decided to check it out. The next day I took a ride to the city to see the apartment. When I arrived, the landlord showed me around. He seemed a bit strange and didn't talk much, but I didn't think too much about it. There was just one catch. I would have a roommate named Sam. The landlord knocked on Sam's door to introduce us, but Sam didn't answer. The landlord said Sam was a quiet person, which he thought was a good thing. We moved on to talk in the living room, and I told the landlord that I wanted to rent the room. I filled out an application, and the next day, the landlord called and offered me the room. I was happy and excited, so I moved in the following week. On the day I moved in, my dad helped me bring all my furniture into the apartment. It was a small room, but it felt cozy. Something strange was that Sam never came out of his room during all the commotion to at least say hi. We heard him moving around in there, though. I thought maybe he was just shy or taking a nap. Later, when I was watching Netflix on my laptop in bed, I heard Sam's door open and close. I thought it was the perfect opportunity to finally meet him. I got out of bed, but before I could even reach my bedroom door, the front door of the apartment slammed shut. I went to the living room, but nobody was there. I wondered why Sam was acting so strange. I decided to go back to my room, eat some ramen, and go to sleep. During the night, I kept hearing thumping sounds coming from Sam's room. I couldn't figure out what he was doing, and it made it hard for me to sleep. I thought about going to knock on his door and asking him to keep it down, but I hadn't even met him yet, so I decided to wait and see. In the morning, when I woke up, it seemed like Sam had already left. Maybe he went to work, I thought. I spent the day shopping for groceries and things I needed for the apartment. When I returned, I left all the bags on the couch in the living room and took a break. I cooked dinner, watched some more Netflix on the couch, and realized I needed toothpaste. I went to a nearby store called 7-Eleven to buy it. When I got back, I noticed that Sam's door was slightly open, and the light was on. I thought this was the perfect opportunity to finally meet him. I walked up to his door and lightly knocked twice before pushing it open. What I found inside was shocking, or maybe I should say what I didn't find. The room was completely empty. There was not a single piece of furniture except for a lonely chair in the corner. It looked like the chairs you find in a high school classroom. My heart started racing, and I felt really scared. I quickly turned off the light in Sam's room and closed the door. I went back to my room, locked the door, and sat on my bed. I had a terrible headache. I took out... When I was just a kid, I had a close friend named Sam. We used to do everything together and have so much fun. But one day, Sam's family had to move away across the state, and we couldn't see each other anymore. It made me really sad because I missed my friend so much. After a long time, I came up with an idea. I talked to my mom and convinced her to drive me all the way to Sam's new house in the country for a weekend sleepover. I was so excited because I knew it would be the perfect place for outdoor adventures. Sam's house was surrounded by big woods, and it looked so cool. When we arrived at Sam's house, I could already feel the excitement building up inside me. The house was a good size, and there were woods in every direction. On the first day, since I got there a bit late, we just talked and watched a movie. But something strange happened. I started hearing sounds coming from below the floor. It made me curious, so I asked Sam if they had a basement. Sam looked surprised and told me that they didn't have a basement. He said his whole family had been hearing weird noises from down there, and they planned to have an inspector check it out the next day. I felt a little scared, but also curious to find out what was going on. The next day, the weather was partly cloudy and warm, perfect for outdoor activities. I convinced Sam to go for a walk in the woods with me. It was all new to him too, so he agreed. As we walked towards the woods, something unexpected happened. Sam accidentally kicked a rusty old cellar door hidden in the grass. It made a loud metallic thud sound. We were both surprised because neither of us knew what was there. Sam bent down and pulled the door open. It made a really loud and squeaky sound. It was so dark down there, but we could see a narrow tunnel with a ladder. We were scared to go down, so we just stared into the darkness. Suddenly, we heard a sound echoing up the tunnel. It sounded like something dropping onto a hard floor, followed by metallic sounds getting closer. It was so scary. We knew someone was climbing up the ladder, and we ran to get Sam's dad for help. When we told Sam's dad what we heard, he was shocked. He called out into the tunnel, asking if anyone was there, but there was no answer. He decided to call his friends for help and told us to stay inside. We were so scared and nervous, wondering who could be down there and what they were doing. Sam and I stayed in his room, not knowing what was happening outside. We could hear voices and see the lights of police cars. It was also mysterious and scary. We were only 13 years old at that time, and we didn't understand everything that was going on. It wasn't until years later that Sam finally texted me one day and revealed the truth about what his dad found down there. He said they discovered 3 full-body bags hidden in a corner, an old cot, and broken beer bottles scattered everywhere. The smell of freshly smoked pot filled the air. It sent shivers down my spine to think about it. Sam believed that the sound we heard was the person living down there and the one responsible for those dead bodies. The whole incident remained a secret between Sam's family, the police, and the people involved. It was something too serious for us to understand at such a young age. But it was a story that stayed with me, reminding me that sometimes there are secrets and mysteries hidden in the most unexpected places. In a little house nestled in the snowy mountains of New York, I had a fascinating and mysterious encounter. You see, I have this cozy house surrounded by vast woods and a sturdy fence that separates my yard from my neighbors. Every winter, I love going up there to enjoy skiing with my friends. But this particular winter, something peculiar happened that gave me chills. It all started when I arrived at my house after a long 4-hour drive from Connecticut. As I approached the front door, a delightful sound reached my ears. It was the sound of a child's laughter coming from my neighbor's house. I never knew they had kids, so it was quite surprising. Nonetheless, I went inside and turned on the water, heating, and everything needed to make the house cozy. After a good night's sleep, I woke up feeling refreshed and excited to hit the slopes. I finished my breakfast, put on my ski gear, and stepped outside. To my surprise, there on my front lawn, I spotted a big red ball in the snow. It wasn't there the day before, so I assumed it belonged to my neighbors. Thinking I was being helpful, I tossed the ball over the fence, thinking the kids would enjoy it. I spent the whole day skiing with my friends, having a blast on the slopes. But as evening fell and darkness enveloped the landscape, I returned to my house. To my astonishment, that same big red ball was sitting on my front lawn once again. I couldn't help but feel a bit unnerved. Nevertheless, I shrugged it off and threw the ball over the fence once more, hoping it would find its way back to its rightful owners. That night, as I lay in bed, I was suddenly awakened by the sound of children's laughter outside. It was 2 o'clock or 3 a.m., and the laughter made no sense. I peered out of my window trying to catch a glimpse of the kids, but to my surprise, there were none to be seen. The laughter had stopped, but my eyes caught sight of something eerie. There, on my front lawn, was the same red ball once more. Goosebumps covered my skin as I realized it was in the exact same spot as before. Without hesitating, I grabbed the ball and brought it inside, hoping that by doing so, the laughter would cease. Strangely, that night, the laughter didn't return, and I managed to fall back asleep. The following morning, before heading out to ski once again, I decided to pay a visit to my neighbor. I walked over, knocked on his door, and introduced myself for the first time. To my surprise, my neighbor turned out to be an elderly man who seemed completely innocent. I inquired about the children's laughter and the red ball mysteriously appearing on my lawn. He assured me there were no kids around, and I couldn't help but shudder. I thanked him, shook his hand, and returned to my house, leaving the red ball in my living room. With a mix of exhaustion and anticipation, I headed back up the mountain to enjoy another day of skiing with my friends. Upon my return that night, I was utterly exhausted and ready to go home the next day. I dropped my belongings on the couch, too tired to unpack, and crashed into bed, falling asleep like a baby. However, my peaceful slumber was abruptly interrupted by the familiar sound of children's laughter. I jolted out of bed and rushed to the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of the source. And there it was, the red ball, sitting in the snow as if mocking me. Panic surged through my veins as I frantically searched the living room for the ball I had left behind. But it was nowhere to be found. At that moment, an overwhelming sense of being watched consumed me. I switched on every light in the house and packed my wet ski gear in a frenzy, preparing to leave if things took a turn for the worse. I double-checked that all the doors and windows were locked, even though they were as secure as ever. With the light still illuminating my house, I retreated to my room, shutting off only those lights. As I peered out of my window, straining to see through the darkness, I spotted something chilling. Behind the red ball, standing in the cold snow, was a child. Their tiny figure stood motionless, fixated on my window. Fear gripped me as I quickly ducked down and closed the blinds. During our special Christmas Eve dinner, we gathered together in our cozy home. It wasn't a big family affair, just my grandparents, uncles from my mom's side, and us. We lived in a duplex, which means there was another family living on the other side. Strangely enough, we hardly saw them, but we had a door that connected our sides. This door was unique, with a lock that required unlocking from both sides, and it could open in either direction. I remember seeing it open only once before the new neighbors moved in. As we sat around the dinner table enjoying the delicious turkey, stuffing, and other tasty dishes you'd expect on Thanksgiving, something strange happened. The doorknob to the door that separated our duplex sides began to twist and turn, as if someone was trying to open it. But this wasn't an accident. It went on for at least 10 long seconds. My dad, being the brave one, got up and walked over to the door. He placed one hand on the lock and the other on the doorknob and called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" There was no answer. With caution, my dad unlocked our side of the door and slowly swung it open. To our surprise, the other side of the duplex was pitch black. It seemed like nobody was home, even though it was only about 6 o'clock and we were certain we saw them leaving earlier. Curiosity and concern filled the air, so my dad, my uncle, and I decided to investigate further. We flipped on all the lights in their side of the duplex and carefully checked every corner and crevice on the small first floor. Suddenly, we heard a loud thud followed by a crack coming from upstairs. It felt like there was someone walking heavily on the floorboards. Fear washed over me and I stayed behind while my dad and uncle hurried upstairs to see what was going on. My heart skipped a beat when a commotion erupted from above, and then I heard my uncle's scream echo throughout the duplex. It was a scream of pure terror. My whole family, alarmed by the noise, rushed from the dinner table to see what was happening. Minutes later, my dad came rushing down the stairs with my uncle beside him, his hand covering a wound on his lower shoulder or chest area. There was a stab wound. We were all frightened and panicked, so we quickly retreated to our side of the apartment and locked the door. While we dialed 911 for help, we simultaneously heard rapid stomping noises coming from the other side. It felt as if someone was angrily banging and ramming into the door, causing small chips and cracks to form. We could hear the grunting and screaming of the intruder as he relentlessly attacked the door. In response, my dad and other uncle grabbed kitchen knives to protect our family. I too armed myself with whatever I could find. We were instructed to stand back while they bravely waited near the door, ready to defend us. Thankfully, the man on the other side eventually gave up his assault, and we heard him hastily exit through the front door. Through the window, we watched him run through the snowy landscape and glance back at us, his face filled with anger and frustration. He jumped into his black Honda Civic and sped away on the slushy roads. But the story doesn't end there. The following year, those same neighbors were still living there. They seemed to be having a Christmas gathering with a few people. By chance, I was looking out of my bedroom window, being a little bit of a snooper, when I recognized one of their guests. It was the same man who had allegedly broken into our side of the duplex the previous year. I immediately told my dad about it, and we decided to confront them. We approached them and told them what we knew, but the man denied any involvement. Even our neighbors defended him, saying he was from out of state. We had no solid proof, but deep down, we knew that those neighbors had something to do with the frightening incident. Our fear and unease grew stronger as the days went by. We couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. Eventually, our family made the tough decision to move out about a month later. The fear of those neighbors and the terrifying experiences we had endured became too much to bear. And so, we left that duplex behind, hoping to find a new home where we could feel safe and secure. I had a scary experience that I still think about to this day. It all started when I decided to sell my beautiful dining room set on Craigslist. I put up an ad with a price of $1,200, but I also mentioned that the price was slightly negotiable. You see, I lived in the countryside where not many people lived, so I wasn't getting many offers. After waiting for what felt like forever, I finally received a phone call from a man who seemed a bit strange. His voice was shaky and he sounded off, but I couldn't quite explain why. He wanted to come and check out the dining room set in person before making an offer, so I gave him my address, thinking nothing of it. He said he would be over within the hour. Feeling a bit nervous but wanting to make a sale, I quickly dusted off all the furniture one more time to make it look as nice as possible. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, and it had only been 10 minutes since we spoke on the phone. I was shocked that he arrived so quickly, especially since not many people lived close by. I mustered up the courage to open the door, but as soon as I saw the man standing there, I felt uneasy. He wore a stained white undershirt with yellow spots all over it, and his baggy pants had a few tears in them. His gray mustache was stained brown in the middle, and his hair was a complete mess. He looked like someone you wouldn't want to see in public. With a shaky voice, he greeted me with a simple, "Hello." I invited him inside, but deep down, I felt uncomfortable about letting him into my house. He immediately caught sight of the dining room set since it was the first room you saw when entering my home. He began walking around slowly, making weird sounds and touching every inch of every piece of furniture. I couldn't help but feel weirded out by his behavior. To break the silence, I brought up the price, reminding him that I was asking for $1,200. To my surprise, he stopped, looked up at me, and gave me the most unnerving smile I had ever seen. He then asked me if I would accept $500 for the set. I laughed, thinking it was a joke, but when his smile turned into an angry expression, I knew he was serious. Apologizing, I told him that the price was much too low for me. The lowest I could go was $1,000. That's when things started to get even stranger. The man put his hands up to his head and started making strange noises again, pacing back and forth. He then looked at me with an intense stare, filled with anger and hatred. It was clear to me that this man was not right in the head. Realizing the danger, I needed him to leave my house immediately. I apologized again and thanked him for coming, hoping he would get the hint. However, he didn't move. He just kept staring at me with that malicious look. Panic set in as he slowly reached his hand towards his back pocket. My mind immediately jumped to the worst possible scenario. He was reaching for a gun. Without thinking, I ran upstairs to my bedroom, straight to my closet. Inside, I grabbed my loaded .45 and took cover behind the wall, peeking out to see what was happening in the dining room. To my surprise, the man was gone. I cautiously made my way back to my room and locked the door. I called the police, my hands trembling, and took cover behind my bed, fearing the man might be right outside my bedroom door. Time felt like it was standing still as I waited for what seemed like hours, listening for the sound of police sirens. Finally, I heard them approaching my house. Still filled with fear, I left the safety of my bedroom with my hands raised, showing my ID to the officers. They asked me to wait outside while they searched the house. Sitting there, my heart pounding, I waited for what felt like an eternity. Finally, the two police officers stepped out of my house, and they had the man in handcuffs. They told me something that sent shivers down my spine. He had been hiding in my pantry closet with a loaded gun. It was a miracle that the police hadn't been shot at. As the police car drove away, I couldn't shake off the terrifying look of malice and hatred that the man had given me through the window. It felt as though his only plan, once he got out of jail, would be to come back for me. The constant paranoia haunted me, and I began to seriously consider moving. I couldn't bear the thought of him returning. From this chilling experience, I learned a valuable lesson: to be extremely cautious when giving out my address to people from Craigslist. I was with my group of friends, Tom, Lily, and Max. We lived in the countryside, so whenever we wanted to go to parties or bars, we had to travel long distances. It was a big deal for one of us to stay sober and be the designated driver. This story takes place on a dark night as we were driving back from town. On our way home, Danny, one of my friends, started crying and said she needed to pee really badly. I told her she had to wait a little longer, but honestly, I also needed to go. So, I thought, why not pull over to the side of the road and find a spot in the woods to pee? Danny got out of the car first and disappeared into the crops on one side of the road. I went to the opposite side and slightly into the woods, because I didn't like people watching me pee. While I finished peeing, Tom and Max were singing loudly to the music on the radio, and I was getting impatient. Danny had been gone for 5 minutes, and it seemed like they didn't find it strange. So I went back out to call her name. I asked Tom to scream her name too, since he had a stronger voice. We wanted her to hear us, but she didn't respond. Feeling worried, I didn't want to go into the crops, but I felt like I had to because Danny was my friend, and I was the most aware at that moment. I forced Tom to come with me since I was scared to go alone. Max stayed in the car because he was too drunk to help. With the flashlight from my glove box, Tom and I pushed through the thick crops, trying to find Danny. As we walked, we heard our footsteps and the sound of the crops brushing aside. But there was something else, a noise nearby. I stopped Tom by putting my hand on his chest, and everything became quiet. All we could hear was the night breeze blowing through the crops. "What is it?" I whispered, and he responded with a hushed shh. Tom called out Danny's name again, and I joined in, thinking she might be trying to sneak up on us and scare us. But her footsteps stopped, and we decided to go a little deeper into the crops. We reached a narrow clearing, like a small pathway through the crops. It was only wide enough for 2 people to walk through. I looked to my left and then to my right with the flashlight, trying to see if I could spot Danny. Suddenly, I heard 3 footsteps, and some crops were pushed outward as someone stepped into view. At first, I could only see the person's legs illuminated by the flashlight. I assumed it was Tom, but when I shone the light higher, I realized it wasn't him. It was a stranger, a man I had never seen before. I couldn't make out his face clearly, but he didn't look friendly at all. Fear struck me, and I ran as fast as I could back in the direction we had come from. It only took me about 10 seconds to reach the car. Max was passed out inside, so I didn't bother trying to wake him up for help. I honked the horn repeatedly, hoping to get Tom's and hopefully Danny's attention. The sight of that man in the crops disturbed me, and I wanted to ensure we were safe. Finally, Tom emerged from the crops, dragging Danny along. She seemed unconscious, and I rushed to help him lift her back into the car. We laid her on the back seat, and Tom pointed out a deep gash on her forehead. It looked like she had been struck with something sharp and heavy. Tom seemed to be sobering up quickly due to the situation, and he suggested we drive to the nearest hospital, which was about 10 minutes away. The drive to the hospital was filled with panic and fear. We were worried about Danny and what had happened to her. As soon as we arrived, we brought Danny inside to have her wound treated immediately. It was then that Tom explained to the nurses, not me, that he had seen some guy dragging Danny's unconscious body before fleeing deeper into the crops. He hadn't mentioned it in the car, but now it made sense. The man we encountered in the crops had harmed Danny. Danny woke up after getting stitched up, but she couldn't remember anything from the entire night. She had no recollection from the party until the moment she got struck on the head. We were all deeply disturbed and shaken by what had happened, thankful that we had found her and gotten her help in time. I am 17 years old, and I started having problems with my dad. He was always getting angry, and things between us got worse as the years went by. Sometimes our fights would get so big that I had to leave home for the night. These fights were about personal stuff that I didn't want to talk about. Whenever this happened, I would go to a friend's house or check into a hotel. One day, on May 9th, 2015, I was 21 years old, and after another huge fight with my dad, I knew I had to get out of there for my own good. I didn't have any other place to go, so I decided to stay at a nearby hotel called Quality Inn and Suites. It was just half a mile away from my house. I had to spend a little less than $100, but I didn't have any other option. It was still early, around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Usually our fights happened at night, but this time it happened earlier. I felt really upset and confused, so I thought it would be good to clear my head by the outdoor pool of the hotel. To my surprise, I was the only one there. The hotel was empty, the pool was empty, and even the lobby was empty, except for the person at the reception desk. I guess our town wasn't a popular vacation spot, so not many people were staying at the hotel. My room was in the middle of the hallway on the second floor. It was strange because they gave me that room even though there were only a few people staying in the hotel. I went to my room after spending some time at the pool. As I relaxed in my room, I heard a very light tapping on the door. I waited for someone to say housekeeping, but no one did. I had put the Do Not Disturb sign on the door handle, so I thought they should have known not to bother me. But then, I heard the lock beep, and the door slowly opened. I couldn't see the person at the door because a wall blocked my view from the bed. I called out, "No, thank you, not right now." I repeated myself because I was getting curious about who it was. Suddenly, the door slammed shut. It startled me, and I decided to go after them and tell them how rude they were. When I stepped into the hallway, I looked to my right, but there was nobody there. I looked to my left and saw the right leg of a woman turning the corner at the end of the hall. I wondered how she got there so fast. I ran down the hall to catch her, but when I turned the corner, she was gone. It was so confusing, and it freaked me out. I heard another door closing, but there was nobody there. I went down to the front desk to complain about the rude employee. The woman at the counter told me that her name was Rosa, and she would talk to her later about slamming the door. I thanked the woman and went to eat at a nearby TGI Fridays restaurant to take my mind off things. When I got back to my room, I was on the phone with my mom. She advised me not to come back home because my dad was still really angry. I felt so down and depressed, and I shared my feelings with my mom. After hanging up, it was only 8 o'clock. I wanted the night to be over already. I brushed my teeth, watched a little TV, and went to sleep at around 9 o'clock. But then, I woke up to a noise. At first, I didn't know what it was. I rubbed my eyes, sat up, and listened carefully. Suddenly, there was someone standing on the left side of my bed looking down at me. I screamed and felt sick to my stomach. It was a dreadful and horrifying feeling. The person grabbed my throat and started saying hurtful words over and over again. It was an older woman, but her grip was weak. Luckily, I managed to escape easily. I ran towards the door of my room, and I could hear her following me. But when I reached the front desk, she didn't come any further. The woman at the front desk admitted that one of the employees had lost a master key that could open all the hotel rooms. They were supposed to report it to the manager, but they didn't. I was furious and scared. I got a refund for my room, gave some information to the police, and went back home that night. Surprisingly, my dad showed something close to sympathy when I explained what had happened. Since that incident, I have never had to leave the house for the night again, and I really hope it stays that way. I have no idea what happened to that crazy woman who tried to hurt me, but I'm just glad I'm safe. My name is Clara, and I am a 24 years old woman. A few years ago, I used to work at a gym in my neighborhood, and something really strange happened during my night shift. You see, this gym was open 24 hours a day, and I was the one in charge during the late hours when most people were fast asleep. Working nights had its ups and downs. On the one hand, there were very few people who came in during those deep night hours. That meant fewer people to check in and fewer waits to tidy up. But on the other hand, I had to spend those graveyard hours sitting at the front desk doing nothing while everybody else was snoozing away. It was a quiet night like any other, and there was only one guy in the gym. He wasn't doing much, just slowly pacing down the gym, looking around. I was curious, so I turned my attention from my magazine to do a little person watching, or I guess you could call it guy watching, since there was only one person there. The gym had a wall that separated the front and back sections. The guy made a left turn past that wall, and he disappeared from my view. I went back to reading, and about 10 minutes passed when suddenly, everything went pitch dark and silent. The power in the gym just shut off. The lights turned off, the music went dead, and it was so dark that I couldn't even see 2 feet in front of me. Thank goodness for our phones with flashlights these days. I quickly turned mine on and tried to figure out what to do next. I remembered that there was a power box in one of the storage rooms connected to the back section of the gym. That's where the guy happened to be. So, with my phone flashlight in hand, I called out for him again and again, hoping he would hear me. As I made my way to the back section, still calling for him, I started feeling this eerie sensation. Being alone in a silent, pitch-black gym, and only seeing the workout equipment through the beam of my flashlight, was really creepy. I finally reached the back storage area, where I thought the power box was located. I tried flicking every switch I could find, hoping that one of them would bring the power back on. But no matter what I did, the lights remained off. Since I couldn't figure it out, I decided it was up to me to close up the shop and wait for the owner, Kathy, to come and fix it in the morning. But before I left, I had to find that guy. I searched the whole back section, looking behind all the equipment and checking all the janitorial closets. But he was nowhere to be found. The only place left to check was the women's bathroom. I hesitantly opened the door and called for him, but my voice echoed into the seemingly empty bathroom. Still, I had to make sure. I pointed my flashlight in every possible direction, illuminating every inch of the bathroom. I checked behind the stalls, but no one was there. However, as I was about to open one of the stall doors, I started hearing strange breathing noises, sickly and deranged. It sent shivers down my spine. I mustered up the courage to ask, "Are you in there?" But there was no answer. I got down on my knees and looked under the stall door with my flashlight. To my horror, I saw 2 legs standing right on the other side of the stall door, practically inches from my face. I quickly got up and left the bathroom, my heart racing. I rushed back to the front desk, trying to figure out what to do next. I attempted to call Kathy, my boss, but she was fast asleep at that time. I left her 2 voicemails explaining the situation. The only other option I could think of was to call the police, so I did. I told them there was a suspicious man in our gym, and I was almost certain he had cut the power. After hanging up the phone, I felt so alone and terrified in the darkness and silence. Then suddenly, I heard a metallic hitting sound coming from across the dark gym, as if someone dropped a weight on one of the machines. I shone my flashlight in that direction and called out for the guy once more. I even announced that we were closed and that he had to leave. That's when I saw something. On the edge of my flashlight's beam, there appeared to be a face looking back at me, a face that wasn't there before. Just then, the blue and red lights from a police car parked outside illuminated the front section of the gym. An officer knocked on the now dysfunctional front door, and I physically opened it to let him in. He took out his flashlight, greeted me, and said he would take a look around. I watched anxiously from the front desk as the officer patrolled the entire gym, checking the bathrooms, closets, and every corner before coming back to me. He said, "It's empty. Whoever it was must have left through the back door." He advised me to lock up and come back in the morning, and that's exactly what I did. When I returned the next morning to check on things, Kathy was already there. Apparently, it was just a simple power outage the night before. Kathy and I watched the camera footage together, hoping to find evidence of the mysterious guy I described. But to our surprise, there was nothing. No footage of him entering the gym, working out, or even just walking around. Kathy looked at me in disbelief, but I was frozen with shock and confusion. I swore to her that someone was there that night, regardless of what the cameras showed. To this day, I still don't know what to think of that night. It remains a mystery in my mind, but I know for sure that I saw someone there, even if the cameras didn't capture it.